Hey, Legal Rebels, this is Tom Martin. I'm the founder of LawDroid, and this is my podcast, LawDroid Manifesto, where I interview legal innovators about how they do what they do.
In this episode, I interview Tara Waters, founder of TLW Consulting and author of Innovation Esquire, whose strategic vision and relentless commitment to learning helps law firms navigate transformation and discover the opportunities hidden in disruption. Welcome to the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. I'm Tom Martin, your host. I'm thrilled today to have on Tara Waters. She is a writer, and she is a founder, and she does so much that she travels worldwide. I actually met her at Future Law in Estonia and got to hear her speak, and I'd love for you to learn more about her, as would I. But she has written Innovation Esquire, and is the founder of TLW Consulting and consults with law firms about the transformation that's happening and how to get through it and how to succeed. And with that, Tara, how are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me on.
And you're based in London, right?
I am, yes. For the past 16 and a bit years, London based.
Well, tell me a little bit about what you're up to now.
Yeah, so right now, as you said, I have my own consulting business, one of many solopreneurs out there working in the legal industry and really just trying to have as much impact as possible. So I work with a mix of law firms and legal tech companies, helping them from strategic advisory down to hands-on implementation work and everything in between.
You know, with everything changing so quickly right now, it seems almost on a daily basis we get an update about something new. Just for example, like we have this craziness with OpenClaw and Moltbook and AI agents running wild on their own. It's a lot to keep up with, isn't it?
It is too much to keep up with, yes. Yeah, between the weekend with ClaudeBot and then Cowork for Legal getting announced, every day is a challenge to try to save things, to remind myself to go back and look at, but also try to digest as much as possible on the fly so that I don't feel too behind.
You know, you're an expert. You're an expert who keeps at the top of everything that's happening that in AI that can transform the practice of law, the business of law, and it's difficult for you. I can only imagine, you know, your clients that are struggling through this, and they themselves, like, their first, you know, priority of business and working every day is doing the work for legal clients, and it's your main piece of business to keep abreast of this, and it's difficult. What are they doing? Like, how are they reacting to this right now? Like, what is the sense from your clients? Is it panic? Is it like that they're stressed out? Is it more of like a 5-year plan? You know, what is the sense of it with them?
I definitely don't think I'm seeing or hearing a lot of panic. I think there's been some interesting trends that I've been observing and been part of over the past few years. I think as a general proposition, you know, most of the industry and a lot of clients I'm working with, which, you know, to clarify, are primarily SME to large law firms. So I don't work yet, you know, a lot with smaller solo practices or consumer-facing practices. I tend to work with much more commercial-facing law firms. I think the vibe overall is a sense that there's a lot happening and they need to be involved. And so it's you know, FOMO-esque, I think, to some extent. But it's, I think, in a much more positive light than probably a negative or anxious light. Because I think what we're finally seeing are lawyers and law firms and partners and law firm leaders seeing the opportunity that all of the change, especially the technology change that's happening, as being genuinely an opportunity for them, but still nonetheless not necessarily knowing exactly the right path to take to get advantage, to take advantage of these opportunities. And so I think what I've been observing anyway is a lot of internal kind of thinking and rethinking, potentially even overthinking probably what should we be doing. So certainly in the market that's over on the side of the pond, I'm seeing a lot of, you know, innovation teams getting restructured, recalibrating, re-strategizing. We're seeing a lot of new roles pop in, replacing different types of roles. I think we're all trying to figure it out. But as I said, in a positive frame as opposed to a negative frame. But definitely, I think there's an overall sense that no one's figured it out just yet. But because so much is going on, a real sense of urgency around the need to try to figure it out in some way.
Well, I really like your focus on like a positive frame for it. And I think there definitely is one. And the fact that you've been ahead of the curve thinking this through, I think provides a lot of comfort and confidence to firms that you work with. I think the first time that I heard you speak was at Richard Truman's, innovation conference, and in London. And I mean, he's been a great source of, community and actually talking about this for many, many years. And I know there's been a lot of law firm partners that have been attending his Innovators Conference, but it seems now that they have more of an open ear and mind to this.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. And I think especially, again, that the market that's over here has been very community driven. And I think that's probably why, from my perspective, I think the moon music is still very positive. And we're seeing a lot of action and activity happening. But I think, at the end of the day, I always hasten to tell everyone I talk to, like, we are still very early days. I know it feels like we've jumped light years ahead in the past 3 or so years, but actually it's still very early days. I think I'm quite fortunate in that in my previous role within a firm, we were within the first batch of early movers. So there are very few people in the market, a year and a bit ago when I started this consulting business who had that hands-on experience. So I had that immediately to offer. I think we see kind of the balls rolling a bit more. We're seeing a lot more people who have had that experience, the ability to actually onboard and bring on board some of these new tools and the experience of trying to adopt them properly within firms. So I think we're seeing a growing amount of experience now. And now it's very focused, I think, back on the community of sharing what people are doing and sharing the lessons that we're learning, because no one's nailed it perfectly, unfortunately, nor do I think anyone's going to nail it perfectly. I think the utopia and the dream of what we know transformation can be, I think, is probably not realistic for our industry. But I think there's a lot we can learn from each other, and we can learn from looking outside of the industry as well.
And that firm experience you have that was at Ashurst, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's where you were when I first heard you speak at Legal Innovators.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. So speaking of past experience and all that, I would like to ask you a little bit about your origin story, and the audience knows that I think they look forward to now learning more about the people that are in our community, because a lot of times we talk about the high concepts, which is great, and we'll definitely get back to that. But to learn more about all of us as people and what motivates us. And were you born in London? Did you grow up there?
No. So I was actually born in Korea. I was adopted. So I grew up in upstate New York in a suburb of Albany. And I spent until university my time in upstate New York. So I was raised American. I'm very, very American, in fact.
Very, very American. Well, you went to Rice and Rensselaer, right?
Yes.
What was that experience like? I mean, where you said upstate New York?
Mm-hmm.
I know there's some parts of it that get quite rural. Like, what was it like where you grew up?
Where I grew up, it wasn't rural. It was fully a suburb. So very, very nice. Lots of, green grass. I grew up in a neighborhood where actually my family was one of a handful of families with the corner lot and a pool in the backyard. And it was very much, I grew up in, I was born in the late 80s, grew up, mostly in late 70s. Grew up mostly in the 80s, in the time when kids went out in neighborhoods and played with each other all day long during the summertime. And, we played kickball and we played tag across all of our yards and rode our bikes around to the store and to the movies and things like that. And it was a very kind of what I have always thought of as a stereotypical suburban upbringing.
Yeah, I remember those times. It's nice that kids used to be able to be, feral and run around and just
Yeah,
experience
yeah.
life like that.
You left your
Um,
house in the morning and then you came back for dinner.
right. I think famously in the States, we even had a commercial that used to come out, like, right? Like it was at 10 o'clock and some celebrities would say, like, do you know where your kids are?
I remember that commercial very well. Yeah.
Yeah, like parents need to be reminded. What are your parents like? What did they do, and did they have any influence on you becoming a lawyer?
Well, I can answer that and say fully no. My parents and my family, very working class. Neither of my parents went to university. My sister and I and my cousins, we were all the first generation to actually go to university, and from both my mother and my father's side of the family. So my father actually worked at Ford Motor Company. There was a plant in upstate New York, in Green Island, New York, shut down when I was in the fourth grade. So he was actually retired since I was in the fourth grade. He kind of just bopped around our town and kind of did his own thing. And then my mother, she did accounting, doing like taxes, and then she ended up working at payroll at Rensselaer, which is part of the reason I ended up transferring there from Rice. I had free tuition doing that. My sister and I actually both graduated from Rensselaer with free tuition, no debt, which was a pretty amazing thing to have coming out of university. Of course, that changed when I decided to go to law school. But I had a nice run for a period of time without any student loans.
To point out to everyone, Tara did quite well at Rensselaer, and I thought it was interesting that even then you majored in electronic media. What was the focus of that major? If you could share that a little bit.
Yeah, I was actually in the first graduating class of that degree, Electronic Media Arts and Communication. We called it EMAC. And I specifically, when I was talking to my family about moving back home to go to university, and that was because actually my mother had gotten sick and I wanted to be closer to the family since Rice was in Houston. I specifically said, if I get into this program, then I'll transfer back home and be closer while my mother was ill. That program was brand new. So the class of 2000 was the first class that graduated with that degree. And it was, I just describe it essentially art, but on computers. So this is the time when things like Photoshop and digital editing and audio editing and video editing were only just producing consumer-facing products. So that was always something that professionals, did, but now finally there were consumer-facing products. So I basically did art. I did art projects. I did video installations. I did graphic design. It was basically just, art projects using computers.
Did you experiment with any coding at the time, or was it just
I
what
did,
was that
but
like?
actually not part of the degree. So the degree itself was very kind of art, electronic art focused. And then actually I have a Bachelor of Science in Electronic Art, which is interesting. So Rensselaer, actually I don't know if it's changed, but Rensselaer happens to be the oldest engineering university in the United States. Most people don't know Rensselaer compared to the other well-known engineering institutes. But has a huge, math, science, engineering background. And so when I was there, it was only accredited to give Bachelor of Science degrees. So I have a Bachelor of Science in art. So that meant I did have to take certain courses in order to round out my degree program and fulfill all the requirements. So I took a Comp Sci 101 class. But before I did that, actually, when my freshman year, when I was at Rice, that was the time when, again, very first early stages of people creating their own websites, doing a bit of HTML. So I had started to dabble and teach myself a bit of HTML at that point in time. So that was more of something that I kind of just taught myself in the way that actually a lot of the people, I think my vintage, learned how to do computer programming, was sort of teaching yourself, finding other things online, copying the code, messing around with it to try to figure out how it worked and how to adjust it for what you wanted. So that was really more of a hobby than what I was focused my degree on. But it actually ended up being the career that I went into because graduating in 2000, I obviously wasn't going for any of the engineering roles. So, we were, as I said, we were the first electronic arts program. So it was kind of, I could try to do something really creative or there was this whole new space in basically .com consulting and .com kind of, I guess, all of these consultancies popped up which were basically the teams behind the famous .coms of that time. So a lot of people didn't know that. I ended up working at a consultancy that built Priceline.com. And a lot of really well-known businesses that no one realized weren't two guys in a garage, were actually a team of people in a consultancy that was probably created by someone that used to work at Bain or something like that. That was basically the model in 2000.
Okay, so the reason for the dramatic pause is like it's sinking into me, like all of the connections, like even from your earliest, exposure to working in the business world, it was a connection between, the engineering side, the understanding of the science of it with, married with artistic, like an artistic point of view, and then the consulting already coming into it.
Oddly, yeah, from day one, I was in professional services, which
Yeah.
I never really quite appreciated that thread actually carrying through my entire career. I almost was always doing professional services of some form.
And the thing that impresses me too is that you have this artistic thread throughout your career, and it's obvious to see it in visiting Innovation Esquire, and just all of the things you kind of touch have a artistic thoughtfulness that go into it. And I see that that it wasn't just getting that degree, but it's also that you got the degree because that's been part of you, and you carried that over to going to law school at Fordham. Your focus was IP and entertainment law, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I looked at one of the things you published about. It was an article called "Gimme Shelter," and it was
Guitar
guitar.
tablature, yeah, the
Yeah.
copyright of guitar tabs.
What was that about?
I actually originally, I went to Rice, which is like kind of well-known liberal arts university. I'd always wanted to be more on the arts side of things. I loved writing, I loved reading, etc. So I always anticipated I would have more of a creative career, and then obviously it took a bit of twists and turns. And I love art, I love music, I love writing, I love reading, I love film. Like those are the things that carry me, throughout the day and on the weekends. So when I was in law school, I was the editor in chief of our IP law journal, and in my last year, or penultimate year, I should say, because I did law school in 4 years instead of 3, because I actually worked full time the first 2 years I was in school. So I did an evening program. I signed up to do the student note program, which allowed you to get credit for writing a law journal article. And at that point in time, I was living in New York City. I was really into music. I was in a band, actually. I was in an all-girl indie rock band. I played the drums. I had spent some time before I switched to the drums trying to learn the guitar. When I first moved to New York, actually, I bought myself an acoustic guitar. A friend of mine taught me the basic chords. And so then when you're trying to teach yourself how to play guitar, one of the things you do is you go online and you find what are called guitar tablature or tabs, which is a specific musical notation system that's not the same thing as actual classic musical notation, specifically for guitar, to learn where to place your fingers on the frets. Those are guitar tabs. And so I use that a lot to learn how to teach myself to play different songs. And my focus on IP law, it was natural that I kind of wanted to do something around copyright in music. So I was explored that a bit with my advisor and landed on doing a journal article that was focused on copyright law as applies to guitar tabs, applying the fair use principles there, but making ultimately the point that, and this was I think the environment at that point in time in the early 2000s, was the industry shouldn't try to lock this down. The industry should use these sort of innovations as an opportunity to allow the community to grow and allow people's love of music and sharing of music and learning to play music to grow. So I was trying to advocate for why the industry itself actually should promote guitar tabs and potentially make a business out of it, as opposed to try to lock it down by suing all of the websites that were hosting those tabs.
My. I could think of some parallels here. Wow. So, okay, let's take a few steps back, because you ended up going to law school, but like many of us, there's usually two things. Like either A, you were the type of person who from childhood was like, I want to be a lawyer. And, people said, well, you argue a lot, so you should go to, become a lawyer. Others, we kind of ended up there because we had a degree that we weren't sure, how to apply it. And then it made sense to go to law school. But it seems like there is a thread, with the focus on media, art, and then going to focus on entertainment law. But for you, what was that? What was that motivation undergrad that led you to go to law school?
Yeah, so I definitely was not in camp one. Like, doing any of the professions really was never on my radar. I mean, maybe when I was little, the idea of being a doctor sounded interesting, but I think the idea of not sleeping for days and then having to provide healthcare services to people didn't appeal. So genuinely, law was never in my radar. As I said, I always thought I was going to be a creative. I wanted to write books and movies and all of that. I ended up more in the creative side of technology, working in digital media in its infancy when companies were starting their first kind of digital media teams, when they never had those before. And at that point in time, I had a good friend that I'd worked with at one of those companies who went to go to law school because that was always his dream was to become a lawyer. And like me, fell into this kind of new online business space that had been created in the early 2000s. And he came back and we stayed in touch. We still stay in touch, and he's still a friend. And he basically convinced me that I would make a great lawyer. He told me that, law needed more people that understood technology. Again, early 2000s, peer-to-peer file sharing was going on. Law needed more women in the field. And he was like, programming and coding is like that logic is very similar to legal analysis. He's like, you're going to pick it up really easily. You're going to be so good at this. And to be honest, that didn't move me per se, but I kind of looked at the environment that I was in at that point in time. And I was, I think, 3 or 4 years into my technology career, I was working, in fun teams, but it wasn't, the technology industry was very different than it is today. So it wasn't like you kind of looked up and you saw these like young go-getters like building things, on the rocket ship, fire emoji, the way it is today.
Yeah.
It was very corporate. So, I was working in very corporate teams, looking up, the head of my team was someone that had just graduated with their MBA, didn't know anything about technology, but that was the person making the decisions for what we did. And I found that frustrating personally. I kind of was like, I looked up and I was like, well, I don't want to be that because that person doesn't know anything about what I do. And I'm annoyed that that person has authority over me in terms of what I'm supposed to be doing because they're making decisions that don't make sense because they had no sense of the technology. And so I think at that point in time, I had hit that juncture of being a few years in and knowing enough to say, I don't know that that's a career trajectory that makes sense to me and appeals to me. And I didn't really have anything else per se that I knew I could do and wanted to do to make money. I actually explored, going to business school and be like, oh, maybe that's what I need to do. Maybe I need to go get my MBA and then I'll be in charge of a team and et cetera. But then I put that to the side and was like, okay, well, let me go take the LSATs and let's just see what happens. And I did okay. I didn't do brilliantly, but I did well enough that, I was able to apply to, I knew I wanted to stay working because I needed to fund this myself. So I applied to all of the evening division programs that were offered in New York, which was really only 3, and got into the highest ranking one. So my friend was like, well, surely you have to go into the highest ranking one, right? And I was like, oh, I guess so. I didn't even understand the rankings. So I was actually very much like, Brooklyn Law sounds fun. and then my friend was like, Brooklyn Law is very good, but Fordham is ranked much higher. So you should probably go to that one. And I was like, oh, okay. I didn't realize that that was an important thing. So that's how I ended up going. And I think for me, it was that potential space of, law being behind technology and an opportunity to be part of something new and nascent and something that was growing. So that was what led me to say, okay, let's do this. But to be frank, like once I was in and then was in Hawk on student loans, that was what drove me to continue on and go into big law. Because frankly, I was like, I have to pay back all of this money now somehow. And I definitely wasn't going to do that with my technology job. I mean, it was decent paying, but definitely not enough to pay back law school loans quickly.
And it's really impressive. I mean, that you worked through law school, that you took care of that with the I'm an adjunct professor at Suffolk Law School, and the class I happen to teach is from like 8 to 9:50 p.m. I'm so impressed by these students who are like is showing up and doing the work. That's a lot more responsibility, but it's also like very indicative of, your stick-to-itness, and I could see how that, transfers over to everything else. So when you were in law school and you're studying IP law and entertainment law, and you were even an editor, um, were you the editor in chief?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Don't want to demote you. Were there any influences there that, inspired you to go down the entertainment IP law, or did it seem like a natural fit based on what you'd already done?
To be honest, yeah, it was more of just the natural fit that was kind of what drew me to law school. I think I definitely knew that kind of more the contentious dispute side was not me. That was an area that, notwithstanding in the U.S., as a lot of people know, you do have to do some specific courses around that. But I knew that was not my talent or my interest. So I definitely knew it was going to be more on the sort of transactional side, advisory side. And so I think I reached that point where basically there were sort of two paths, which was try to be the cool techie lawyer at a law firm in New York City. And to be honest, I really wanted to maybe do something that was more music focused. I wanted to be lawyer to the, rock stars, basically. So I was like, okay, how can I do that? Or actually, the crossroads I hit when I was in law school was meeting some international law firms like Allen and Overy, who hosted student events. And I found out that there are law firms outside of the United States that hire American lawyers into their offices outside the United States. So then, basically when I was going through OCI, that was what I targeted. I targeted the law firms that had international offices and would hire people or second people with like in early years, and the cool techie jobs that were in New York City.
What was the name of your band?
It was called Plastic Passion, but the plastic was with a Q instead of a C at the end, named from the Cure song.
Is it possible to get a hold of any track?
I imagine it's possible. I did check. We're not on Spotify, but we did record an EP. That was the last thing I did. Was I did a recording session to record the drums for the EP.
So check it out on Spotify if you can. Let's talk about Ashurst, because you were there for over 9 years, right?
Yeah, literally just a couple months shy of 10 years.
Definitely like a big influence, a lot of experience there. And I'm just curious, like, if you were to name like the top two things that you learned that were takeaways from your experience there, I mean, in a way, based upon the time that you were there and your position, I think you kind of like led the way as to creating and defining what that role is. But I'd like to hear, from you what that was like for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think like I have just so many positive memories of that time at Ashurst. I think there was a fortunate coincidence in terms of what was happening in the industry and my level of seniority in joining Ashurst. That all kind of coalesced into this perfect storm where I could carve out a space that was totally unique, never been done before. And I got that opportunity, I think probably one of the first opportunities to be really entrepreneurial, but in a very large and structured organization. I think, gosh, there's so many things that I learned from the 10 years there. I think one of the key things, and I say this and have said this, in the past quite a lot, which is I think I learned the value of the concept, and I think this actually comes from an article that was written about Apple and Steve Jobs, but the concept of experts leading experts. And I hold on to that very closely. I think it's really important that the people you work with and learn from, have some connection to what you're doing. If you go all the way back, as I said, to some of my early tech industry experiences when these people fresh with MBAs were coming in and making decisions for me. And I was like, what, why am I listening to this random person that doesn't understand what I do? Like within a law firm and in legal practice, everyone that's more senior to you genuinely has more experience than you. And if you're in a particular practice group, they have more experience than you in the area that you're practicing in. And I think that ability to look up and see that expertise and learn from that and draw from that in different ways, I find very valuable. And I think probably subconsciously took that to heart a lot, so that even as I started segueing from being a full-time practicing lawyer and partner to more in the operational innovation digital side, I was still every year taking multiple courses, making sure I was skilled up so that I could always be a team member that contributed. I was never just the manager or the head of the team. I wanted to be a contributor at the same time. And it was important to me that I understood what my people did and I wasn't just barking orders at them, expecting them to do something, knowing and having them look at me and be like, she has no idea what she's talking about. She doesn't know what we do. She doesn't understand. I think that's really important. So, when I started to be able to form my own team, I kept that in mind. I always made sure we're always taking courses and skilling ourselves up. And then I always made sure that anything that any of my team members were doing, I wanted to make sure I had a sufficient skill set in that area that I could lead them in the right way. I think that's really important. I take that, with me now. I don't have a team yet, but, as and when I reach a point where I can have a team again, I think that'll be, again, something that I keep with me and keep to heart. Since you asked for two, I think the other thing, and this was a piece of advice given to me by my sponsor, who worked there. She's currently the chair of the firm, Karen Davies, who supported me in the corporate team and is the one that put me forward for partnership very unexpectedly. And what she always told me was to back myself. And I think in a law firm environment, I think as a female, as a minority, but also then as a person that was always trying to do something a little bit different and new and against the grain, I think it's really easy to not feel self-assured and to question yourself. And I think, I have her voice in my head always reminding myself to back myself, and that, that's not to say I don't put the ideas forward and act immovable upon them. But it's very much of reminding myself that I should have confidence in what I'm doing. And I always, then strive, as I said, to make sure that I back up that confidence with real capability. And those are the sort of the two things that I think are important and go hand in hand.
I love that. I think that's a great lesson for people to take away, is that it's not only about the confidence, which a lot of people could have confidence, but it's also about the fact that it's backed up. You have the skills, you have the experience, and you certainly do. And I felt the same too sometimes, is that even when you have that, sometimes you feel like you don't, and and it's great. It's great that, she was there to remind you about that. I think we all need that reminder.
Yeah. And I think, again, like it's okay and it's normal, I think, to have moments of self-doubt and to wonder if you're doing the right thing and wondering if you're making the right decisions and you have the right information. But despite my creativity, I'm also very data-driven. So, I always made sure, like, I've got every I and T dotted. I've got all the information you need to answer your questions. I wanted to always be bulletproof in those conversations to the best of my ability. And so, I always do my homework and come to those conversations ready to go.
And that's a true differentiator, because there's certainly like a lot of people that don't come to the table with having done that research. So you definitely stand apart when you do that. I'm thinking a little bit about, the fact that as a chief digital officer, that was the progenitor of all the chief innovation officers now. And that was quite, were you one of the first to be in that role? Well, I would think at Ashurst, definitely.
Yes. Yeah. And I think there's, at that time, I don't believe there was another person in the legal industry with that particular title. And I crafted that title and chose that title and promoted that title with our exec team to get it approved very specifically to not be a chief innovation officer title. I didn't want innovation or transformation in the title because I thought it was really important to try to use language around that particular role and what I thought the remit of that role should be and the accountability of that role should be, to be what I defined as digital. And then actually I put forward, this is my definition of what I think digital is. But ultimately, it conceptually, it's where the business and the technology meets. And I was, probably one of the only people in the firm at that point in time that could truly straddle both sides of the firm. And I won't get on a diatribe about the difference between the business of law and the practice of law and how I think those are not two separate things. And the fact that we've treated them as two separate things is part of why we have transformation and change challenges currently. But I was a fully practicing partner, in the corporate team. I had that experience, shifted over quite quickly to also the operational side. So really seeing how decisions were made, all of the people that were in the engine behind the, under the surface, trying to keep the wheel spinning, and was across all the systems that we use. I was probably one of the people in the firm that's used almost every single system and understood how it worked. but also really, brought the practitioner lens to that, and at both lawyer level and partner level. So I think for me, that was really important that I could let my colleagues know that I was their voice. Like, obviously, I was speaking to them a lot and drawing from everything they told me, but I wanted them to know that they had a strong advocate and voice in me because I absolutely understood everything that they knew and thought and did and were going through. But also that I understood the structural challenges and the operational challenges that existed in the firm, and how to get things done. And that I would, really do my best to try to bring those two spheres together and find a space where we could actually push things forward.
I think that's super important and something that gets glossed over. What I mean is the fact that not only did it give you an advantage to having done the work yourself, that you knew it from the ground up, because sometimes we hear about like built by lawyers for lawyers, and it becomes more of like a bumper sticker. But the other aspect of it is that you are in the right to talk to people about it. They respect you and listen to you because you've been through it, and so that social dynamic, that that ability to actually build trust is integral. And it's not just about the information.
Yeah.
And so
I think especially considering how fast we want it to move and I want it to move, I think having that innate trust, having come from the practicing side, all the partners, I was going to say most of the partners anyway, knew me as their colleague who helped them out on deals and helped them with their clients, et cetera. So I think what that meant was immediately from day one, in terms of the lawyer and partner population, I had, that trust with them. They knew me already. They knew to come to me. So I didn't have to spend a lot of time building that. I could focus more on the operational challenge. And I think I was fortunate to benefit from that because it does take time to grow that. I've seen, I had people in my team, some of whom didn't come from a legal background. And it was really important. And I did see, they gained that trust quite quickly. And I think that, for me was a key skill set in terms of as I grew that team out. And as I see them now and how they're growing currently, I see that, that's like a huge enabler in terms of the pace at which you can move, is to have people that, even if they don't have it innately, can gain it quite quickly.
So naturally, the next step that I'd like to talk to you about is, into consultancy, which is kind of like, it seems almost, 360. You're coming back to it from where you started. But, as a founder of TLW, with your writings with Innovation Esquire, like, why the transition? It does seem like you can affect many, many more firms and lawyers and how they're thinking about this, but a little bit about the transition and what your focus is now.
There were a number of factors of trying to make the transition. I think the biggest factor was I had been doing it for nearly 7 years and had thrown 150% of myself into that, physically, emotionally, psychologically, and I had reached a threshold where I was exhausted mentally, genuinely, and physically exhausted. And notwithstanding, I thought and still think, the team we had was fantastic. It was doing great things. I think there was still the ultimate challenge that most law firms face, which is an uncertainty about the pace, and the commitment of investment that would be necessary to maintain that pace. And I think I'd reached that point where I personally didn't feel confidence that was coming. I had a lot of verbal assurances, but I didn't necessarily think I saw the action that was convincing me that the verbal assurances were going to actually come true. And I'd reached that point where I said, I have a lot more to give. I can dig deep into the well and give even more. But at that point, I said, if it's going to still feel like the uphill struggle that it's been for 7 years, I'm not sure that I can keep up with that at this point in time. I needed the break. And that was, really the main reason why I decided to transition out of private practice. I actually intended to take a much longer career break. And, I had been, having some discussions about potentially moving on to a role straight away. And in the end, I sat my partner down. I have a long-term partner of 12 years. And I said, hey, would you be okay if I didn't work for the rest of the year? And this was coming up. I already had my end date, end of August. So it was only a few months. It wasn't a significant period of time. But I actually said, maybe I just need some space to figure myself out and to actually have a proper break. And we agreed that would be fine. There was no issues with that. But within a few weeks, I was at a conference in New York City. I met Val's AI, they announced they were doing their first legal benchmarking study. I marched up to them, was like, "Hey, I just quit my job. I got lots of free time. Can I help? Can I help with this? I make work and find work for myself quite easily." So that's how I ended up, moving quickly into the consulting space. I just couldn't stay out of it, to be honest with you. And I always tell people, I'm like, I don't know where it comes from. I don't know why. I have this incredible passion for this space and this challenge, and I want to be a part of it. I would have major FOMO if I wasn't a part of it. So I couldn't stay out of it. So ultimately, it was kind of like, okay, let me incorporate a company really quickly and try to get myself up and running so that I can now start working with other people. And again, very fortunate that because of how long I'd been working over in the market here, had a lot of contacts, had a lot of work flowing through the network really fast, really easily. So it was no problem in terms of filling my boots for that first year, which was really great, and very, very thankful for that, and got to do a lot of different work with different people and use the opportunity to really ultimately figure out which parts of the old job did I actually really like doing, which things that actually I could maybe go ahead and not actually keep doing those types of projects again. So I had the opportunity to test out what I liked doing, what I didn't like doing, what I was good at, what I was less good at.
We talked a little bit beforehand, and I definitely feel the same. Like, there's a lot of things that interest me, and it's kind of hard not to pursue them. And it sounds though like it was a good fit. Like it just came up at the right time. Like you just happened to have the free time, and this was really interesting stuff. So you've been working, not only with consulting law firms, but legal tech companies, and what they're doing. And like, there's such a ridiculous amount of interest right now. You must have a lot of work. One thing I want to ask you about in the time we have is, you wrote recently, and I thought it was amazing. Like, I thought it was really cool because it's definitely a great way of articulating the problem, but also like a deep way of articulating the problem with transformation in law firms. And what you did is you wrote on Innovation Esquire about Newton's laws, but with it being a metaphor for how we're dealing with it in the legal industry. And let's just talk about the first one. And the first one has to do with an object in motion tends to stay in motion, Newton's first law. So what are your thoughts about that, and why you wrote about that, and how it applies to lawyers?
I use Innovation Esquire as my kind of one of my creative outlets. And I have a note on my iPhone, just really hundreds of ideas of things that I can write about. I try to theme them though, and I do try to be very, very thoughtful about the way I present things. In the end, I think a lot of what I write about though is trying to say the same thing in different ways to hit the audience, to try to find a way for the audience to actually get what this challenge is about. Because at the end of the day, I think like what we've been trying to do within law firms and law firm transformation and technology adoption has not massively changed ultimately what is required and what we need to do. But we've been churning for a decade, and we haven't necessarily seen the light yet in terms of like, wow, it's happening. It's really happening. I mean, lots of great things are happening in technology, but I'm not sure that there's a lot of law firms that can say hand on heart, hey, it's really happening here. Like, yes, there's more activity, but it's not necessarily that the whole firm is properly transforming. So I do rely heavily on metaphors to try to convey ultimately what I hope, in particular, senior leadership and lawyers will take to heart versus, our innovation colleagues who, we're preaching to the choir a lot of the time, really to help them understand and appreciate also the work that's being done. Because I think I do like to be provocative with Innovation Esquire in particular in my LinkedIn posts. But sometimes I realize I have to not provocate, and actually I just need to try to help raise awareness and understanding. So using something like the laws of inertia, things in motion tend to stay in motion, things at rest tend to stay at rest, to, hopefully a little bit as a call to arms to say, hey, if you're leading a firm and you don't feel like you're moving, that probably means you're at rest. And if you're at rest, you need to get out of being at rest. But guess what? The physics say you're not going to. The physics say something else has to happen for you to actually get going. So, hopefully a realization that you can't just wait for something to come along. Like, something has to initiate that movement. and everyone else that's been moving. And, we look at the different studies, the PwC studies, the Thomson Reuters studies. There's a gazillion surveys that all show, again, not massive movement, but they do show a reasonable chunk of firms who are still sitting on the fence about what to do about things like AI. They're not yet pushing forward, deeply in that space to sort of say, hey, these firms are ahead of you. It's not like they're massively ahead. It's not like they've all transformed their business models now and have clear competitive advantage. But what they do have is now, in some cases, 2.5 years of understanding the technology, of the time to, if they're investing in it, understand the impact of the technology on business model, on pricing, on profit, on resourcing, on incentive structures, etc. Not that all those firms are necessarily investing in exploring those things heavily, but they do have that leg up. And so, I've worked with some firms where they're sort of like, have had the viewpoint of, listen, like maybe we're going slower than everyone else, but at the end of the day, we'll just end up in the same place probably because we all have access to the same technology. And on the one hand, you're like, yes, of course. So that's great. Be conservative, save your money, save your energy, don't burn out your people. But on the other hand, I was like, but you are losing something, letting that time pass without doing anything. It was intended to be a little bit more of a, hey, like wake up a little bit because we know you're not standing still. No one's standing still. But if you're not changing much, nothing is going to compel you to change. And we've had a decade and a half of those external pressures that should have been moving all of the firms. And I think if, to the extent that all the firms are maybe slowly moving, inching forward, that those external pressures are having some effect, but we're not seeing, that acceleration of movement yet, which if you care about, that competitive dynamic, if that's one of the things that helps change your decision-making process. And I get a lot of feedback from law firms that say, our exec team wants to know what everyone else is doing. That's the thing that kind of shifts their thinking when they feel like they're not in lockstep with who they consider their peers. I think that's one of the ways to hopefully get some of those law firm leaders to think a little bit differently about what they're doing and why and what it takes to actually change.
Well, very well said. And I think everyone out there, listen to Tara, just do it. Well, I would like to ask you the couple questions I ask all my guests, because a lot of them are like you. They have a lot going on, and it's a challenge to keep things balanced, to have a work-life balance, if that's possible. What are your thoughts on that? Do you have a work-life balance?
I have a very, very strong philosophy on this that comes from my very first job out of university, that .com consultancy that I went to work for in 2000. And this is what they ingrained in us, and it stuck with me from day one of training, which was there is no such thing as your work life and your personal life as two separate things. You just have one life. So anything that happens on one side or the other will always influence. And so I've always taken a holistic view of my life. I've never, you separate time you spend doing different things, but for me, there's no actual separation. So I think that me personally, I don't necessarily think I have lots of balance because I am, an insufferable learn-it-all. I'm constantly, I'm always taking courses, doing things, trying to stay up on what's happening. So I devote a lot of time and an inordinate amount of time to what are probably much more work-related things. But it's also because, I've done the personality test. I was like, that is my number one personality trait, which is I love learning. So that is something that feeds my soul. Even though a lot of what I learn is, stuff that I leverage from a work perspective, it's the stuff that feeds my soul anyway, because I love learning and understanding things and being able to explain things and then using that knowledge to help other people. So that's what I do as my job. And that's what I like to do, with a lot of my spare time. So I don't believe that, I was going to say, I don't believe that a person can have it all. I don't believe a person can find perfect balance, but I think what you can find are the activities that actually feed all of those aspects of your personality.
Well, I think that's a fantastic way to look at it. I personally practice the same thing. And, leads me into the last question, which ties into that. At the end of the day, when you do all of these things and you get to talk to all of these people about what they're doing and what your thoughts are and what the future holds, like what makes it worthwhile for you?
I think it goes back maybe to what I just said, which is helping other people, feeling like I'm actually impacting other people or other businesses in a positive way. And I have, my favorite moments, when I'm not just working, my favorite moments are when I help someone understand something or find some clarity or reframe the way they think, or just give them some really, really great advice that they say, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way, but actually that's really good. Those are the things that make me feel like I have actual purpose here. And I'm a very purpose driven person as well. Like I think, I actually was gonna say, not to get too deep, I don't know that I've found my whole purpose yet in this world. I feel like I have a lot more to potentially give the world, but I've always dreamt of, I think I never dreamt of being a lawyer, never dreamt of being a technologist, and never dreamt of being an innovator. I've always though wanted to have an impact on the world in some way and in a meaningful way. So if this is the channel through which I'm going to do that, that's great. If there are future channels that I can do that, I'm probably going to pursue them till my last breath. I'm Asian. I'm going to live till I'm like 120. So I know I got lots more time to have that impact. But that's it. Like I really want to have impact, and not in a selfish, like I want people to know my name type of way, but because it makes me feel amazing when I do that.
Well, that's an amazing way to end. I think that you're definitely going to find that. I think you've already had an amazing impact, but for that maybe larger purpose that you're looking for, based on our conversation and everything that you've done with your career and your life, I am very confident you're going to find it.
Thank you. I hope so.
Well, with that, thank you so much for being on the show, Tara.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a great conversation.
And for those that are watching that want to keep in touch and learn more, how can they do that?
Best place to reach me is on LinkedIn. And sadly, I'm always there. So if you message me in some way, I will almost always get back to you.
Perfect. And for all of you watching, thank you so much. See you next time.
Thank you so much for watching the latest episode of the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. To keep in the loop about upcoming episodes, please subscribe to LawDroid Manifesto and you'll get notified. Thanks for watching. See you next time.